Hi, folks. This is Liz Williams from Campaign for Southern Equality with Priya Ray here. And we're just talking today because Sunday, July 26th, marks the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And July is also Disability Pride Month. At the Campaign for Southern Equality, we wanted to be sure to take this anniversary as an opportunity to acknowledge the many Southerners who also live with and are impacted by disabilities. Hi, Priya. Thanks for having this conversation with me.
You're welcome. And I just do want to include, it's actually the 30th anniversary of the ADA, and Disability Pride Month has been around like since the 90s, but no one knows about it. And that's a big issue with the disability community.
Oh, thank you for telling me. I didn't even know about it until this year. So
I know that's like, I wasn't disabled in the 90s, so I actually didn't know about it till I became disabled. But yeah, that's why we do what we do, because we need to let everybody know, like, hey, we're here.
Absolutely.
We're not going away.
Absolutely. All right, Priya, I know you from around town, be it like at where I work at Whole Foods or at Static Age, and in between those different places in the community. And we've both been involved in different faculties of the music scene here. And I just wanted to ask, can you share a little bit about why you're interested in having this conversation today?
Yeah, I've been thinking about it a lot today because I'm trying to make a video for this event that I'm actually doing at Revolve, July 30th. That's going to be stories of disability. And I kind of was thinking about my own story, because I never really tell people my own story, which is like, I was in a DIY music band called Cream Electric Santa, and through the 90s, and I had my injury in 99, and then through the 90s we created a community of underground artists and musicians, and it was really important to us to be socially active and be inclusive to people that weren't being included. And when I became disabled and decided I wanted to go back into doing that, I realized that the scene that I had been part of for almost 25 years, that I helped foster, not the only person that fostered it, but one of the people that did, I wasn't included anymore, and people didn't realize it because, as you know, and most people that know me, I have this extremely positive attitude. So even after I was disabled, I was like, oh, well, I'm disabled. Okay, so how am I going to do these things as a disabled person? So a few years went by, and I was really frustrated and was trying to like text people and explain, like, hey, you're inviting me to this show, or you're inviting me to play this show. Are there stairs? Like, just trying to like make them understand, like, I'm in a wheelchair. So, you have to think about these things, but that didn't work. So I had to start my grassroots group, just DIY Abled, which I first started really to inform the DIY community about including accessibility, because my theory is that the DIY community is really, it's the grassroots community, essentially. It's I don't want to say it's the bottom of the community, but it's the community that doesn't have money, doesn't have resources, and we figure out how to do it. And I really felt that was the community I needed to speak to, because if we can make accessibility, access and accessibility something people think about there, then I feel like it would grow into the entire community, because usually that's where things start, in the grassroots community or the DIY community, musically and artistically. and socially. So that was my first idea. But now I still speak to the DIY community, but then I realized the disabled community is its own DIY community, so that I needed to speak to everyone, not just the DIY community. So that's like how it all began. And that's why it's so important to me, because the ADA was a law that was passed for the civil rights of disabled people. And as I went through the world as a disabled person, I started realizing that when I couldn't get into a place or I couldn't access a place, there wasn't like a big voice about that. People were just like, oh, sorry, we're going to go have fun, but sorry, you can't be a part of it. And I didn't, that was something I was not willing to accept. So I decided to start the DIY Able to speak first to my community, the DIY music and art community, about like, hey, and I always tell them, you go to a business and you can't get in or you can't use the bathroom. And if you're a person of color or someone that identifies as LGBTQ, or even a woman or man or non-binary, all these things, if a person, if someone was like, oh, sorry, you can't enter here because of that identity, it would not be accepted. But for some reason, for disabled people, it's considered like people are doing you a favor by giving you access. And I don't, I would use more stronger words, but I don't think it's right.
Well, I totally get that. I was wondering, because of these barriers that you face, how has the ADA affected your life?
Well, first I always like to start this conversation with thanking all the people that came before me that fought really hard and really aggressively to be able to get the rights I have today. And I do feel like the younger you are, the less you get disconnected from fights that were made for you in the past, and you kind of take a lot of things you have for granted. So I do want to start by thanking all the people that came before me that fought for what I have today, which are like curb cuts, ramps, wide doors, education, like access to education and all these things. But not a few, there's a lot of areas, but one of the things where I feel disabled people are left behind is employment and being the way to earn money. And even in the medical system, you will find ableism, because the medical world, if you're suffering from something that has to do with your disability and the doctor can't figure it out, they kind of blame you. They're like, well, you didn't want to take this medication, you're not doing this, so there must be something wrong with you because you're not fitting into what we believe should be able to fix you. So so there's so many different avenues where this, like the word ableism. And for those of the people that don't know what ableism is, in sense, it's a I don't know, what do you call it? It's like a racism or homophobia. So I don't know what those words are, the definition of those words are, but it's a word to describe how when you are disabled, you are left out of a world that is created for people that are non-disabled. And a lot of the theory, a lot of the talk that people say in the disabled community is that I am disabled because the world is built in a certain way that makes me disabled. So it's not that really that we're different from other people. We just live in a world that never thought of us when they were building it, and therefore we are disabled because we can't maybe get into a place, or maybe closed captioning isn't there, or screen reader, you know, all these things that are there for people with different disabilities to have access to the world that everybody else does.
It's so discouraging too, since being disabled, that's the largest minority in the world. So you would think, oh, after so many years plus centuries, that people would be like, you know what, actually we should be more thoughtful about our brothers and sisters and siblings. But we still have a ways to go, unfortunately, but hopefully things will continue to become more accessible for everybody. I was so encouraged watching the Crip Camp webinar that you showed me today. It was really cool to see how people reflected on how their identity affects how they're perceived, like in media and in the arts. And I was wondering, I identify you as a Southerner because I've seen you in the South for all these years, but how would you identify yourself?
Well, I identify myself, I've lived all over this country and I don't have the typical Southern accent, but I grew up in the South for most of my life. And I always told people, when I retire, the South is where I'm going to be because I love the South. So I do identify as a Southerner. I identify as an Indian as well, because that's the country my parents came from. But I guess I identify as an Indian Southerner.
Okay. All right, easy peasy. I was wondering, with this identity, do you think that it has brought specific experiences to your disability?
Are you talking about being Southern?
Being
No,
Southern.
I'm asking about the idea you're asking about. So can you repeat the question? So you're asking, as a Southerner, if it's brought...
Well, how do you think being a Southerner and a person of color, how do you think that's affected your experience with your disability?
Oh, I don't know. Like, I'll have to admit that growing up Indian in wherever I lived, whether it was the South, the North, the West Coast, I never found racism affected me the way it has other friends of mine that are Black or Hispanic. And I don't know, I think that has to come with being Indian, because Indians, I think, in American perspective, are like, these are people that come, you know, from the culture's so different. So I think it's more like people are more, and I like to say, ignorant about the culture. I don't think it's like they look down at you about the culture, because most Indians are very successful, very hardworking. They're kind of like the biggest earners financially in America. Oh, sorry, dog is barking, but that's because people are talking outside. And so, so racially, I don't really find, and I'll actually tell you, racially, I actually find people were more racist in the North than they were in the South. Because I lived in Atlanta, I lived in Florida, and I live in North Carolina. And some of the things I've heard coming out of just like everyday people's mouths, like, I'd be like, oh my gosh, that's so racist. So like, it was very interesting to me, like, living in Pennsylvania and witnessing the racism that existed in comparison to places like Atlanta or Miami, and here in Asheville as well. So racially, I never really found a big obstacle for myself in that way. Now, disability, I don't feel it's that much different in the South than it is in other parts of the country. And in fact, I'm going to have to tell you, I lived in the West Coast, and when I first had my injury, all my friends were like, move to the Bay Area. It's the most accessible place in the country. And I was newly disabled, so I didn't even really know what that meant in my mind. But then when I moved there, I was like, I found it so hard to get around. Like I would, like on this, I lived in this place, West Oakland, and like, and I would always ride around in the streets and take the BART places, and like, you know, I'd go down the sidewalk and I'd have a curb cut at one end but not at the other end, so I'd have to turn around, find a drive. And then eventually I just started riding in the streets. I didn't even use the sidewalks because they were, you know, they weren't usable for me. And then eventually I just started using bike lanes, and the bikers were like, yes, solidarity. So cool, they were happy to share their bike lanes with me. And so, and even in here in Asheville, sidewalks are horrible, and but not that much worse than Oakland, California, in my opinion. So I still use the streets and the bike lanes here. So it's not like I as far as those types of things, I don't feel there's that huge of a difference. The difference between the Bay Area and here is that you could actually speak out and fight for it, and the government would do something about it. Whereas here, you know, it's a little bit more of a harder fight. But I like a harder fight. I don't like preaching to the converted. I like preaching to the unconverted, because that's how change is made.
So when you say a harder fight, do you mean like just with people in the community, or do you mean like with like legislation here?
Yeah. Legislation, not so much people. Like in Asheville, let's face it, we're in this little liberal bubble of the South. But you know, most people, when I talk to them and explain to them, they are very sympathetic and, you know, understand what I'm talking about. But I'm talking about legislation wise, and not even so much in Asheville, but the state, you know, and like that's, you know, it starts at the states and then it goes down to the counties. And so if the state, like for instance, a friend of mine came over yesterday and was like, oh, Roy Cooper is recognizing the 30th anniversary of the ADA. And I was like, well, that's really nice of him, but the way he could really, really be a supporter of the ADA is by giving us more benefits, giving us caregivers, you know, because like, even like me, I don't need that much caregiving. I probably would need an hour a day just to help me like get some things I need to help me get out of bed because of my pain, which I had in California, and they easily paid for it. And that's because it was worked into the legislation there. But here, caregiving is like, you literally have to be a bedridden person to get caregiving, which is great because if you're bedridden, you obviously need caregiving. But there are a lot of people in the world that are disabled that need caregiving, that they can't. I mean, I am very privileged. I can dress myself, I can bathe myself, I can do all these things, but there are some people that are disabled that can't, and they can go out and work and get to a job and do things, but they just need a little help in those things, like maybe making them some food or cleaning their house or whatever it is, like, you know. So that's how I think, you know, the state of North Carolina is not really following what the ADA, you know, like says it should do. So
Okay,
that's legislatively, essentially.
yeah, thank you for clearing that up.
Yeah.
I was wondering, so what are some of the steps that people who want to be allies for people with disabilities, what is something that you would suggest that they do if they want to help with changing the legislation?
Well, legislation. So I will say I mean, of course, now we're in this quarantine time, so I can't go out and give talks and, you know, speak out about the rights of people with disabilities. But there are a lot of disabled people that can't do what I do. They can't leave their house because of their disability. And, you know, if they do, it's really hard work. They'll need a caretaker. They need someone to help them, you know, park and do all these things. So it's not, they don't have the same independence I do. So that's why I choose what I do. I speak out for them. But then I need allies because I can only do so much too. So I do ask people that are non-disabled, that are Black, that are LGBTQ, that understand the oppression they go through. We go through it too. So I ask, and I, you know, and white people too. I'm not saying white people shouldn't be on. So we should, if you, and the thing is, anyone can be disabled. It doesn't matter what you are as a person. So by being an ally to the disabled community, you're essentially being an ally to yourself, because it could happen to you. And most likely as you age, you will have some disabilities, because that's just something that comes with aging. Your body just doesn't work as well as it did when it was young, and you will need help. And the ADA is there to make sure you get that help.
Cool. So would you like suggest like calling in like reps, like state reps and whatnot, and Roy Cooper and other people's governors, and be like, yo, come on now, this can happen to all of us, and the people who have had this happen already, they need help. And you know,
Just calling the governor, calling your state senators, and calling the city council people. Like, let's just face it, Asheville is a huge tourist town. They make so much money. And, you know, like, I just have a lot, you know, I'm always looking down at the sidewalks because I'm in a wheelchair. And if I'm not watching, I could fall off of it or something. And the sidewalk widths of in Asheville are my wheel. I'm a frightened going through some of, and especially if they're like that, you know, steep, which they are, because we live out, you know, like if I'm going down the street that's really steep and I barely fit on the sidewalk, I'm really freaked out. Like, I really have to be careful to make sure that I'm not gonna go accidentally in the wrong way and fall off of this sidewalk. So that's the number one thing, is the width of the sidewalks are unacceptable. And then curb cuts are, I mean, I guess could I specifically talk, like, so like that, God, what is it? I think it's called Walnut Street. It's downtown.
yeah,
Oh my God, the curb cuts there are like shattered. Like, they're like art pieces essentially. Like, if you take a photograph of like, this is like some weird art piece I could blow up and put on a whole wall and people wouldn't even know what it was. But they're just so broken and shattered that, you know, these are the reasons why I don't use the sidewalks. I use the streets because, you know, I have chronic pain. You know, going over something like that hurts my body. I'm just ready to ride in because they actually take care of the roads better than they do the sidewalks, because people drive not that much better, because the roads are actually a little patched up itself, but at least it's patched up and it's not broken. So, you know.
absolutely. Excellent, excellent. Okay, I have another question, because I believe that you've mentioned in the past that your mom has had mobility issues as well. So,
Well, okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
so I was just wondering, like, outside of the DIY community, how has your, how have you had any sort of journey with regard to your views on disability from when you were young until now?
Well, it's really interesting because my mom had rheumatoid arthritis, and she basically started getting the symptoms around the time probably around the same year I was born. So, and that was like the 60s. So, you know, rheumatoid arthritis, I think maybe they knew what it was, but who knows how they even treated that, and, you know, how it was treated, because one of the main things we like to say in the disability community is we don't like to be identified by what our disease or illness is. We like to be identified as the person we are. So while I had a spinal cord injury, I don't want people to be like, oh, she has a spinal cord injury, so dot, 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 because obviously I do a lot of other things. I'm a musician, I'm an artist, I'm a really good friend, I'm fun to hang out with, and I have a spinal cord injury. That's like what a lot of the people in the disability community in America try to work with. So in America, the ADA, that is the one thing the ADA has provided for disabilities in America, is that you are not identified by your illness. Whereas in other countries like India, where my family's from, the illness defines you. And my mom, you know, because of the ADA and the stuff that happened here, it was great. My mom was able, you know, with her rheumatoid arthritis, she was able to drive. She could park in accessible parking and go, you know, shopping. And we were opposites, my mom and I. She liked to shop. I'm like, I can't stand shopping. Like, I'm like, just give me whatever clothes, I'll wear them. I'm not really into this. But she like had like a closet full of outfits and jewelry, and that wasn't my thing, but that's what she liked to do, and she should have been able to do it. And because of the ADA, she was finally, you know, like, she came here in 1965. I think her arthritis started culminating in 1968. So for about, that's like about a little, you know, not 30 years, so like 28 years where that wasn't provided for her. Then in 1990, she was able to go out and do all these things. So she didn't really have mobility issues, but that came along for her so late. And she was really educated. She had a master's in library science. So she could have gone out and got jobs, but because that the legislation wasn't there for her at a younger age, she wasn't able to develop a career as being a librarian. And I almost think now, if she was living now at a younger age, then now we have, you know, where people can work remotely. And so, you know, so like those kinds of things would have been available to her. So I'll be honest, I didn't really think about that when I was young, because I was being young and, you know, just what young people do, don't have sympathy for their parents. They're like, have sympathy, but like, I'm gonna go do this, I'm going to this party or that party. So I didn't really think, I didn't really think about what her life was like until I had become disabled. And she was such a great source of and that's when I really began to understand my mom's disability, because she was like my cheerleader. Like when I was in pain or bummed out and I couldn't do something, she was just like, it's okay, just do this, just, you know. And it was really great to have a parent that understood what you were going through. So in that sense, yeah, I mean, I do feel like having her helped me transition into becoming a disabled person much more easily than it has been for other people too. So those are the ways my mother helped me. And she passed away a few years ago, so hats off to you, Mom.
I'm sorry about your loss. My mother, she also, aside from being a crafter, a mother, a teacher, she also had mobility issues. Like she had a broken ankle, and she passed away a few years ago. But yeah, it's interesting how you just kind of, it doesn't phase you how much of like a monumental change somebody shifts through when their body like starts to act differently because of factors that are out of their control. She had a car accident and it shattered her ankle. But anyway, it definitely helped me with shaping my view a little bit. But as the years progress, especially after seeing Crip Camp, I was like, wow, there are so many ways that we could have improved her life. But
Yeah, and that's kind of what I think, like now in hindsight, I kind of think, I mean, I came from an Indian family, and we had, my mom's sisters lived here. So like we had a big family network. So we all just figured out how to help. We did so much stuff. It wasn't like, but we helped my mom. It wasn't that we were able to buy her wheelchair and use that
Right.
wheelchair, help her in places where it was hard for her to walk. But because of the ADA, like when we did go to places, they provided wheelchairs, so we were able to get, like if we were, I'm going to use Disney World as an example. Like, we went to Disney World once with me and my brother and my dad and mom, and they had wheelchairs there, so we could just push her around the park, and that was great because I don't know, she wouldn't have been able to do it. So
Yeah. So I was wondering, since we're getting close to the end of this lovely conversation and educational, inspiring conversation, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I just think, like, as I said, I was grateful to the people that came before me, but there's still a lot more to do. And my friends and I, my disabled friends and I, that we meet up every week and have talk about stuff. And we're like, we are the second wave of Crip Camp. This is us. This is our time. We're going to go do this. Because, there's so many things that aren't still right. Like, I have a friend, Tylea, who's 24 years old, and she tells me stories that happened to her in the educational, like getting an education, because she was born with the disability and she had to go to school, and just her struggle with getting an education and being able to go to school and then later college. It was a real struggle for her. And I'm like thinking, this is in the 2000s. Why is this happening to a disabled girl who's really, really, really smart? Like, why is that happening? And so there's so many changes that need to be made, and it's not just law, it's people's attitude about it. So it's the law, the attitude, and the awareness. It all works together. So I feel by raising awareness that it will change the attitude and the law making process. And so there's still so much work to be done. And I was actually talking to my friend today that voting is actually not made accessible. Some disabled people can't vote. And that's really totally wrong. Like, not to be able to voice of who you want to protect your rights as a disabled person is wrong. And so, yeah, there's all these things that need to be changed.
That reminds me, speaking of changing people's minds and attitudes, could you really quickly say I'm not sure if you have a website, but could you say your Instagram handle? And also, you used to make zines. Do you still make little booklet zines?
Oh yeah, I have the zines. They're like, okay, so DIY abled, it's spelled DIY, like do it yourself, abled, like, so, and then I have a website, I have an Instagram, I have a Facebook page, and I even just started a Twitter account, even though I never use it because I'm like, what's happening here? But I'm like, it just completely confuses me. But you can totally follow me, contact me that way. And I do make zines. I'm thinking of making more zines this year, but the first two zines I made is a guide to accessible parking. And it's actually made for both communities, the disabled community and the non-disabled community, because a lot of disabled people don't even really understand what the different spots are for. I'd actually have to get into, I wouldn't say arguments, but discussions with people that are questioning what I'm saying. And they were like, I'm going to call the North Carolina DMV to make sure. I'm like, all right, this is where I got the information, but go ahead. And so I made that actually for everybody to understand what the different spots are and then why you shouldn't park there. And then I made another zine that's called DIY, the DIY community and accessibility. And my purpose for writing that was to reach the DIY community because, you're part of the DIY scene, so you've been to shows where they're not really excited. They're in people's houses or these small spaces. So I kind of gave some tips and suggestions on how you include people in your community that are disabled, whether it's through advertising on your flyers or Facebook events, like saying, hey, this is totally ADA compliant, or it's ADA friendly, meaning you can get in and out, but you might not be able to use the bathroom or access all the parts of the space, and then just not accessible. And always have a contact information, because you want to make a disabled person feel welcomed, to be able to ask if they like how they can get in, if it's friendly, like I have a cane or a walker or a wheelchair, like there's different there's different equipment disabled people use. And one person might just need a stair rail. They might not even have a cane. You might even not be able to tell they're invisible, which is called an invisible disability. So they might need a stair rail, or they might need people to like help them. So, so that's my advice. But I also feel like it can apply to everyone. Like if you live in a neighborhood and you happen to notice someone disabled and you want to invite them to your house, I feel like these tips can apply to that as well. So yeah. So yeah, so the behind the scenes, you can get them on my web. I think I have on my website. I've been really slack about my website. Sorry, world. I'll get to it. But you can write me about them, and I think I have like I made it downloadable, so if you wanted to just print it, I call them advocacy tools, and you can print them and share it with the world yourself. You don't even have to get them from me. So
Super rad. Just want to double check for the website. Is it a .com, .org?
a .com.
Excellent. So cool.
Is it?
Thank you so much. A delight as always.
Yes, I always love hanging out with you, even in the virtual world.
Ditto, definitely. All right. Well, I hope that you have a lovely rest of July 26th. Woohoo! For the 30th anniversary.
I've been watching, there's a YouTube channel called True Project, and my band is actually on there, so if you want to go see that, you can go see that. But they're like having all these disabled people of different kinds, actors, models, writers, poets, musicians, kind of just going and performing or talking about their experiences. So if you want to learn about disabled people, I suggest you go check that out. It's going on today. I think it'll go on tomorrow. I don't know if it'll go on tomorrow, but they've been doing like 3 days of flooding the YouTube with all kinds of people with disabilities.
Fantastic. YouTube True Project.
Yeah, True Project, YouTube, look it up. I'm going to quote Alice Wong, who's a pretty big disability activist from San Francisco. Disability people are everywhere. You can find us everywhere. You just need to include us. And that's what she says.
Thank you, Priya. All right. Well, I'm going to check it out, and I hope you have a great day.
You too. Me too. You too. I hope you have a great day. Thank you so much for including me, and hats off to Southern Equality. Yes, I love it.
Thank you.